Have you ever witnessed a moment where people judged too quickly, only to be left speechless by the truth? Welcome to Stories of Hope, where today you'll hear a story that will stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, I just want to say hello to everyone tuning in, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. It was a rainy evening in the heart of New York City. The streets glistened under the soft glow of streetlights, and umbrellas bobbed up and down like little ships sailing against the storm. Inside one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, a place where the chandeliers alone cost more than most people made in a year, the atmosphere was warm, refined, and filled with the soft clinking of silverware against fine china. Well-dressed guests sat at polished tables, speaking in hushed, important tones, while waiters in crisp uniforms floated from table to table like silent ballet dancers. At the entrance, the maitre d', a tall man with slicked-back hair and a stiff smile, stood guard like a sentry, scanning every guest with a glance that measured wealth before it measured warmth. To dine here was a privilege, not a right, and every person who entered was expected to look the part. Then, through the heavy revolving door, she appeared. Soaking wet from the rain, wearing a tattered brown coat that looked 2 sizes too big, her shoes scuffed and worn thin, she paused in the entrance, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. Her hair was flattened against her head from the downpour, and a frayed scarf clung to her neck. Every eye in the restaurant turned to her at once, like a flock of birds startled by a sudden noise. Conversations halted. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips, and then, quietly at first, it began. The smirks, the whispered laughs, the sideways glances. Some tried to hide it, coughing into their napkins, while others made no effort at all. One couple near the front exchanged exaggerated looks of horror, as if her mere presence had spoiled their filet mignon. The maitre d' stiffened, stepping forward with a rehearsed apology already forming on his lips. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he began, his voice low but firm, "but perhaps you're looking for somewhere more suitable." The woman looked around, her eyes wide and vulnerable, as if absorbing the sheer force of rejection radiating toward her from every direction. For a moment it seemed she might turn and flee back into the night, swallowed by the rain and the city that had likely treated her just as cruelly many times before. But instead, she did something none of them expected. She smiled, not a timid, apologetic smile, but a calm, knowing smile, as if she saw right through them, as if she understood their judgment better than they understood themselves. Without a word, she walked deeper into the restaurant, her wet shoes squeaking softly on the polished marble floor. Gasps followed her like ripples in a pond. A waiter tried to intercept her, but she merely raised one hand, not threatening, not aggressive, just a small gesture of patience. It was enough to make him stop in his tracks. From a corner table near the back, an older man with sharp eyes and a deeply lined face rose to his feet. He wore a dark suit, simple yet elegant, and though he was not flashy like the others, there was a quiet authority about him that made people notice without even trying. He walked toward the woman, meeting her halfway. The entire restaurant fell into a stunned silence, the kind that hums with 1,000 unspoken questions. As he reached her, he extended his arm, and she took it like an old friend. Together, they walked back to his table, where he pulled out a chair for her with all the ceremony due a queen. For a few seconds, it was as if the world itself had stopped spinning. The maitre d' looked frozen, his mouth slightly agape. A woman at a nearby table knocked over her wine glass in her hurry to lean closer, desperate to catch even a hint of what was going on. The older man called for a waiter, his voice firm but polite. "Bring the finest bottle of wine," he said, "and tell the chef to prepare his best dish. Tonight we celebrate." Celebrate? For a woman who looked like she hadn't had a hot meal in days. The whispers returned, this time edged with curiosity instead of cruelty. Who was she? Why would someone like him, someone who clearly commanded respect, treat her with such honor? The poor woman sat there gracefully, hands folded on the table, eyes quietly observing the room. She did not gloat, she did not scowl, she simply existed in a place that had made it clear she did not belong, with a dignity that made those around her shift uncomfortably in their seats. And as the evening unfolded, one truth became clearer with every passing second. This woman was not what they thought she was. And by the time the night ended, every smirk, every chuckle, every cruel whisper would be swallowed by the heavy weight of shame. The restaurant that had once laughed at her entrance would never forget her exit. The minutes ticked by, but the weight in the room only grew heavier. Dishes were brought to the table, delicate plates adorned with sauces and garnishes most people couldn't even name. But for once, nobody seemed to care about their meals. Their attention was locked on the poor woman and the older gentleman, watching, guessing, whispering behind polished menus and half-full wine glasses. The woman ate slowly, gracefully, as though she'd been raised in places far finer than this restaurant. Every move was delicate, careful, almost trained. She didn't gulp her wine or devour her food like some expected. Instead, she handled the utensils with an elegance that suggested she had once known this life, or perhaps something even greater. Still, the confusion in the room thickened. The maitre d', trying to regain some control over the situation, approached the older man's table with a stiff smile plastered onto his face. "Sir," he said quietly, bending slightly, "I hope everything is to your satisfaction. If there's anything else you need." The older man didn't look up from his glass. He simply said, "Everything is perfect," and gave a dismissive wave, the kind of gesture that ended conversations before they began. The maitre d' retreated, his pride dented, his nerves fraying at the edges. He could feel the eyes of the staff and guests alike pressing down on him. How had he gotten this so wrong? Who was she? As the evening wore on, the mystery deepened. Some guests were starting to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. A few had even pulled out their phones, subtly trying to snap photos without being noticed. Others whispered theories. Maybe she was an eccentric billionaire. Maybe the man owed her a debt. Maybe, and this was whispered only half-jokingly, she was someone with powerful friends, and this was all some kind of test. Still, the woman said almost nothing. She laughed gently at something the old man said. She smiled when a waiter nervously brought over a dessert tray, without even being asked. Her eyes, tired but sharp, scanned the room, and every person she locked eyes with seemed to shrink a little under her gaze. It was clear now, she was not ashamed to be here. If anything, it was the restaurant, the people inside it, who were starting to feel the shame. Toward the end of the night, as coffee and delicate pastries were served, the older man finally rose again, tapping his glass lightly with a spoon. The small, clear ringing cut through the murmurs of the room like a knife. The room went still once more. "I would like to thank you all," he began, his voice calm and full of a quiet strength, "for giving us your attention tonight, even if it was not given kindly at first." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room, but it quickly died in the heavy silence. "You see," he continued, his hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder, "this remarkable woman is not just a guest. She is the owner of this building. In fact, she owns this restaurant." Gasps broke out across the room. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere. One woman at the front table nearly choked on her wine. "Yes," the man said, nodding slowly, savoring their disbelief. Years ago, she walked these same streets, much like she did tonight. She worked tirelessly, saving every penny, sacrificing comfort, dignity, and even health, all to build a life. And she succeeded beyond anything any of you could imagine. She purchased this building 2 years ago. She kept the restaurant open because she believed in second chances, in offering beauty and comfort to those who could appreciate it. She's been away for some time, traveling, giving her time and fortune to those who needed it more. He looked around the room, letting his words settle deep into the bones of every person listening. But tonight, he said softly, almost sadly, she came back, not to flaunt her wealth, not to judge, but simply to see if kindness still lived here. He didn't need to say the next part. It hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. They had failed. Every single person who had laughed, who had sneered or whispered, had failed a test they hadn't even known they were taking. The woman stood slowly, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. She turned to face the stunned room. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was no mistaking the hurt behind her eyes. "I once stood outside these very doors," she said quietly, her voice steady but soft, "dreaming of the day I could afford even a cup of coffee inside. Tonight I didn't come as a wealthy woman. I came as the person I used to be, to see if I would be treated any differently." She paused, letting the weight of her words crash down. And I was. Somewhere in the back, a napkin was crushed tightly in a trembling hand. A man shifted uncomfortably, staring at his untouched plate. Without another word, she turned back to the older man, nodding slightly. Together, they began walking toward the exit, leaving behind a restaurant filled with expensive suits, designer dresses, and souls that suddenly felt a whole lot smaller. But just as they reached the door, something unexpected happened. A young waiter, no older than 20, broke away from the crowd. His hands were shaking slightly as he stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking with nerves. I'm sorry, I didn't laugh. I didn't judge. I just thought you looked like you needed a warm meal. I would have served you gladly." The woman stopped. For the first time all night, real warmth filled her tired eyes. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small envelope and handed it to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Sometimes it only takes one kind heart to change everything." And then she was gone, swallowed back into the rainy night. The envelope, trembling in the young waiter's hands, would change his life forever. But that part of the story is still to come. The door swung closed behind her, and for a moment, the restaurant was frozen in silence. Not the elegant, practiced silence they were used to, but a heavy, uncomfortable stillness that wrapped around everyone like a thick blanket. The young waiter stood there, staring at the envelope in his hand, almost afraid to open it. His fingers trembled slightly as he tucked it against his chest, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Around him, the murmuring started again, but this time it wasn't filled with gossip or smug laughter. It was regret, shame, and confusion. At his station near the kitchen, the head chef peeked out, confused by the strange energy in the room. Waiters huddled together, whispering furiously. Some customers awkwardly picked at their food. Others asked for the check, their faces pale and their movements rushed, like they couldn't bear to sit there another minute. Meanwhile, the maitre d', still pale as a sheet, moved toward the young waiter. His voice was low and harsh. "Give me that envelope," he said, reaching out his hand. "You can't just take—" But the young man shook his head firmly, stepping back. "She gave it to me," he said, his voice finding a surprising strength. "She chose me." And for the first time that night, the staff began to see the maitre d' for what he really was, a man more concerned about power and appearances than doing the right thing. Whispers started among the staff, and the kitchen doors swung slowly back and forth as more people peered out. Feeling the eyes on him, the maitre d' dropped his hand and turned sharply, retreating toward his office. He slammed the door behind him without another word. The young waiter, now shaking from adrenaline, slipped into the empty coat room to open the envelope in peace. He carefully pulled out the card inside. Thick, expensive paper with gold lettering. His eyes widened as he read the simple message. To the one who chose kindness when no one else did. Use this to build the life you dream of. S. And tucked inside was a cashier's check, not for $100, not for $1,000. It was a check for $50,000. His breath caught, his knees nearly gave out. He had never seen that kind of money in his life. College tuition, family bills, the dream of opening his own little cafe one day. It was all there, suddenly, impossibly, in his hands. Tears welled up in his eyes. He sat down heavily on a bench, clutching the envelope, whispering a shaky thank you to a woman who was already gone into the rainy streets. Back in the restaurant, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Word spread quickly among the staff about what the woman had done. Some of the older waitresses wiped at their eyes. A few guests, realizing the gravity of what had happened, left quietly, their heads bowed. The glamour of the restaurant felt hollow now, as if the chandeliers and golden trim could no longer hide the ugliness that had been exposed. Later that night, when the last customer had slunk away and the last plate had been cleared, the staff gathered together. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, but it hung in the air like thick smoke. They had failed a test of character, except for him. The young waiter became a quiet hero among the staff that night, not because he had made a grand speech or demanded attention, but because he had seen a human being where others saw only someone beneath them. But the story didn't end there, because across town, in a small, warm apartment above a laundromat, the woman sat by her window, sipping a plain cup of tea. She watched the rain fall against the glass, her coat still damp from the walk home. Next to her sat a faded photograph, an image of her much younger self standing in front of that same restaurant decades ago, wearing threadbare clothes and a desperate smile, clutching a crumpled job application. They hadn't even let her inside back then. She had built herself from nothing, scrubbing floors, working double shifts, sleeping in shelters when rent ran out. Every inch of success she earned came at the cost of blisters, heartbreak, and loneliness. She had risen higher than anyone ever thought possible. And yet tonight, as she sat alone by the window, she realized something painful. Money could change your life, but it couldn't always change people's hearts. And that's why she had come back. She needed to believe that even in the most polished, elegant places, among the wealthy and comfortable, kindness still had a chance to survive. That young waiter proved her right. Maybe, just maybe, the world still had a little hope left, after all. Across the city, the young waiter sat awake all night, staring at the check, thinking not about the things he could buy, but about the kind of person he wanted to become. Because tonight had taught him something too. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars or fine clothes, but in the choice to be good when no one is watching. And tomorrow was going to be a brand new beginning for them both. Morning light spilled over the city, washing the streets in soft gold. A new day had begun, but for two people on opposite sides of town, everything felt different now. At the restaurant, the young waiter stood outside, staring up at the towering, gleaming windows. His uniform was neatly pressed, his shoes polished, but something inside him had shifted forever. He wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. Last night had shown him who he really was, and who he wanted to be. He didn't walk inside, not yet. He just stood there for a moment, letting the cool breeze rush past him, carrying away the old fear, the old doubts. Today wasn't about survival anymore. It was about purpose. Inside, the restaurant felt strangely hollow. The maitre d' sat in his office with the door closed, ignoring the stares of the staff. A few of the regulars had cancelled their reservations. Rumors had started to spread beyond the walls of the restaurant, not about the menu or the decor, but about what had happened, about the woman they had laughed at, and the lesson she left behind. No amount of fancy linens or expensive wine could wash away the truth. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The owner of the restaurant, a stern man rarely seen by the staff, walked through the doors. He didn't waste time. He gathered the employees in the dining room, his face serious. "I've heard what happened last night," he said, his voice low but clear. "And it's not who we are supposed to be." He looked directly at the maitre d', whose face flushed red, then turned to the young waiter. "You," he said, his voice softening, "showed more class and dignity than anyone else here. From this moment forward, you're promoted to assistant manager. Full benefits, tuition assistance if you want it, and if you ever want to open your own place, I'll back you." There was a stunned silence. The staff exchanged wide-eyed looks. Some clapped quietly, others just smiled, nodding, their shame from the night before still lingering, but slowly being replaced by something better. Hope. The young waiter's voice caught in his throat. He could hardly speak. All he managed was a humble, "Thank you, sir," before shaking the owner's hand, the room around him blurring with emotion. But he knew, deep down, the real gratitude belonged somewhere else. Meanwhile, across town, the woman finished her tea and slipped on her coat. Once again, she had no intention of disappearing into the shadows. She had plans, big ones. That check she had written, it wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, she quietly visited shelters, youth centers, and struggling families, offering help where she could, always in small private ways. No news cameras, no headlines, just kindness, the kind she had once needed herself. One day she returned to the restaurant, but not to dine. She waited outside on a small bench across the street, her scarf pulled up against the chill. She watched through the large windows as the young man she had met that night moved through the dining room, his posture taller, his face lighter. She smiled, seeing how much had changed, not just in him, but in the whole place. Staff smiled more genuinely now. They treated every guest, regardless of appearance, with real warmth. Her heart swelled. She didn't need to go inside. She didn't need applause or thanks. She had seen what she came to see, proof that even in a world obsessed with appearances, true kindness still had a place. As she rose to leave, a little girl selling flowers caught her eye. She knelt down, bought every flower the girl had, and tucked one into her coat pocket, a simple red rose. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be. But as long as even one person chose to act with compassion when it mattered most, there was hope, and that was enough. As the city bustled around her, she faded into the crowd, just another face among thousands, carrying with her a quiet power, the kind that didn't need riches, titles, or fame, the kind that changed the world, one heart at a time. Thank you for listening to this story on Stories of Hope. If you believe kindness still matters, if you believe one act can change everything, please make sure to subscribe for more real stories that remind us what truly matters. Until next time, take care of one another.